and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris. Welcome to Consider This. This is the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. August 9th marks the International Day for the World's Indigenous Peoples, and on this episode, we will be focusing in the Malaysian context on inclusive education for Orang Asli students and how to close the gap between Orang Asli students and mainstream students. I'm delighted to introduce my guest today, Dr Suria Selasih Angit. She is an assistant professor at the School of Education at the University of Nottingham, Malaysia. She has long been a passionate advocate for inclusive Indigenous education and cultural inclusivity for the Orang Asli community in Malaysia. Her research areas include, among others, education for Indigenous communities, language and symbolic power, and multicultural education. Dr. Suria, thank you so much for joining me on this show today. I appreciate your time, and I'm glad to have this conversation with you, and hoping that you can begin our conversation today by maybe helping us understand a little bit about the current formal education structure for Orang Asli children. For most Orang Asli children, what would be their typical route into navigating the formal education system? What would be their entry point, and where might they be most vulnerable to dropping out of the system? How should we be thinking about it?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Melisa, and thank you, Astro AWANI, for having me. All right, going straight to your questions. All right. So as we were talking about education for Orang Asli students. Orang Asli students generally, for the primary levels, generally almost all Orang Asli students will go to Sekolah Kebangsaan Orang Asli, all Orang Asli schools where Orang Asli students learn with other Orang Asli students. I mean, it's a all Orang Asli school. So, but there are also other primary school students who go to mainstream schools where they learn alongside other peers as well from other ethnic groups. And then in the secondary levels, all right, usually these Orang Asli students will go to mainstream schools where they have to start learning alongside their peers from other groups. And however, nowadays we also have what we call K9 school, comprehensive 9-year schooling, where students learn from standard 1 to form 3, like 9 years of education in all Orang Asli schools before they move on to mainstream setting. So yeah, and
Okay.
yeah.
So since you said it, most Orang Asli students begin in primary school, is there early childhood education? Do Orang Asli children have formal taska tadika education?
Oh yes. We do have kemas in the also the attendance rates for the Orang Asli children. The encourage more Orang Asli students or Orang Asli children to go to preschool education, because we know that without that education level, then it's going to be even more challenging for them in primary level. Yeah.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, most Orang Asli children go to primary school in Sekolah Rendah Kebangsaan Orang Asli, mainly Orang Asli school, and then transition into a mixed mainstream secondary school. When you do your research or you look into inclusive education for Orang Asli students, what does that look like? Can you give me an understanding as to what inclusive education from primary all the way till the end of secondary looks like for Orang Asli children?
Okay, so over the years, I mean, especially for the past 5 to 10 years, we've been talking a lot about inclusive education for Orang Asli students as well. So it is in line with our blueprint, the National Education Blueprint, and also the SDG goals, where equality, access are two of the main thrusts that we are trying to promote for Orang Asli students as well. However, right, as we go deeper into this field, we realize that there is no clear definition of what inclusive education would mean in the context of Orang Asli education. So I think for generations, for decades, all right, of policy making and also policy implementation, a lot of the planning comes, it is a top-down approach. So the voices of Orang Asli communities, what the communities really want or really need, have not been foregrounded enough. So in my opinion, when we talk about inclusive education for Orang Asli students, right, even though inclusive education, traditionally it comes from the special education field, but it has been expanded to also students from vulnerable communities, underprivileged communities, which also includes our Orang Asal or Orang Asli in Malaysia. So one of the important components that we have not talked enough is actually our efforts to remove the barriers that our students, our Orang Asli students are facing. So barriers are not only in terms of the physical barriers or geographical barriers, but also in terms of the our understanding or misunderstanding of the Orang Asli cultures as well, which is very much related to the empowerment of identities as well. So yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Let's talk a little bit about those barriers. I think physical barriers has been long talked about. Socioeconomic barriers, geographical barriers, infrastructural barriers. All of that has been discussed. Can we touch on the intangible barriers, the cultural barriers? What are some of the unique cultural considerations that need to be taken into account when thinking about inclusive education for Orang Asli children?
All right. That's interesting because all these barriers, all these challenges are actually interwoven. So what we have been doing for decades is actually we are only looking at the symptoms. So there are three main problems or issues that we often talk about. Low attendance rates in schools, low achievement level amongst Orang Asli students, and also high dropout rates. And then for decades, we have been talking about how to actually address these problems without actually tackling the root causes, which are these are the causes or the challenges, the struggles that we need to talk more about, because there are underlying reasons why students don't go to school, why students drop out of schools, and why students are not achieving. Right. One of the reasons that we need to look further into, based on our studies, more recent studies have started to actually look into the underlying reasons as well. And one of the biggest challenges or struggles that we are facing is actually the deficit discourse or the negative discourse, the way that we view Orang Asli issues. In many conversations, in many forums, Orang Asli issues or the struggles that Orang Asli students are facing are being viewed as a negative things and with victim blaming attitudes. So it's always the Orang Asli students, it's always the Orang Asli parents, and never other factors surrounding them. So I'm not denying that students, parents play really important roles in education, but they are not the only stakeholders or they are not the only actors involved. So that leads to the mismatch between the system and the curriculum that we are using for the students and the needs, and also the aspirations or the directions that they would like to take. Yeah.
Okay,
just
all right.
The underlying problems, yeah.
So many things to unravel there. Let's talk a little bit about that. When you talk about negative discourse, are you talking about a certain stereotype that that different stakeholders have, from policy to administrative to community? Is that the perception, the stereotype that you're talking about when it comes to negative discourse? If so, how do we change that, if that is one of the kind of underlying issues of all the symptoms that we want to address?
All right. Yeah, that's very much related to the stereotypes and also the misunderstandings. There is a common misunderstanding or misconception that Orang Asli students are not capable of achieving, which is not true, because there are Orang Asli students who have proven that they can also achieve, but the socioeconomic backgrounds or all the backgrounds, the factors in the background really play important roles as well. And then I think one of the ways to actually address this together is to be transparent and to be honest enough in the way we work with the community, and not just by saying it, but by actually having concrete or tangible or practical step to actually address our biases, our implicit biases, our internalized prejudices. Because a lot of us, myself included, even though people always view me as an insider, but to some extent, I think all of us have our own biases, and I think that is the first step that we must take. One of the my current works at the moment is actually to start trust building activities among stakeholders. And one of the activities that we do is actually self-reflection. Before we start a workshop, before we start a community engagement, we have a small self-assessment session, self-reflection, where we invite our participants or our collaborators or whoever that is involved in that engagement to actually answer a few questions to check how much we understand about the Orang Asli communities, where we get the information from. Are we sure that those are the facts, or just some stereotypes that we don't really check or fact check? So based on my experience, this is something new to our community at the moment, to our research community or community engagement people. But it's been really useful, because then we are given some time to actually check. Oh, okay. I heard about this, but I heard Orang Asli is like this and like that. But this is just something that I heard. I don't even know enough Orang Asli individuals to actually confirm whether this is true or not. So because this is a self-reflection, we let the participants to just do it on their own, but there are also participants who feel like, I would like to share this. So the sharing session will actually really help to address any stereotypes or any biases that we have. It's been a rewarding journey for us actually to do that self-reflection.
That's amazing, because you actually confront whatever implicit bias that you might have, and you address that. Can I ask you, when you ask questions about, how much awareness they have about Indigenous cultures and histories and lifestyles, and where they get the information, what has been the overwhelming response? How do Malaysians learn about Orang Asli? What they know about Orang Asli? Where do they get that information? Where have they learnt it?
I think first of all, the stories that we hear from someone that we know, who knows someone that they know, and then always rumors, stereotypes, and then also from media depiction, especially like international media who like to romanticize the indigenous lifestyles, and so that's why we still have like documentaries or programs who actually portray Orang Asli as jungle people, and which is fine. We are very proud of our forest heritage as well, but at the same time we also want to highlight what we are doing in the 21st century as well, the talents that we have in the community as well. So because we don't have enough conversations with the general public and also with our stakeholders, policymakers, about who the Orang Asli truly are, so we tend to carry these stories and these stereotypes over, and then it becomes like a general truth, which is not actually true. So yeah.
Do you think that people understand about how multifaceted Orang Asli communities are? There's so many different tribes and languages and cultures and beliefs, and they all are slightly different. But I feel that many people don't have an understanding, myself included, don't have a clear understanding of it. Where do you think we've gone wrong here, that we don't really understand our fellow countrymen?
All right. I think it's just that we don't know each other well enough, and we have not had the opportunities to actually explore, to get to know each other, to build the trust that we have lost generations ago. Because this is not only for general public. In fact, in the research community as well, this is something that researchers are not really aware of, like academics and also policymakers. I believe that our policymakers and ministry, they are aware of this, but the richness of these 18 different subgroups, the richness of the culture, of the knowledge, our traditional knowledge, is not highlighted enough. So the problem or the challenge that would come with this is when we think of all Orang Asli communities being the same group, facing exactly the same challenges, then we tend to have this one-size-fits-all kind of solution, which doesn't work, because we need to look at the contextual issues, and we need to look at the geographical factors, and also the group traditions as well. Yeah. So that's why we want to talk more about this, so that people are aware that the solutions have to be, different as well. Similar, but cannot be exactly the same. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So a one-size-fits-all solution does not cannot apply to all the different unique challenges that different communities face. Because there is such a lack of understanding about the Orang Asli communities, can I ask you what this means for young children, particularly in a formal education setting, in a school setting with a mainstream school culture? We've talked before, I think, about Indigenous communities or Indigenous children facing pressures to assimilate because there isn't a celebration of diversity in a school setting. Can we talk a little bit about what this means for young Indigenous children and their sense of identity and the impact on their learning outcomes?
All right. I will focus on the Orang Asli of Peninsular Malaysia. Yeah, Orang Asli communities, Orang Asli students. So there will be two main struggles that come out of this. So the first one is in terms of their identity, it's not being appreciated enough, and because of the misunderstanding, so many Orang Asli children used to, or maybe some still do to this extent, believe that, in order for you to become successful, particularly in education or in any other arenas, you need to be transformed into something else or someone else. So your own traditional knowledge, your own traditional ways of life are not valuable enough. Those are not the capitals that you can use to actually succeed, which is not true, because when we talk about sustainability movements, and a lot of traditional Indigenous knowledge now has been revived, and but to the young ones, we've lost that, because we get into the mainstream system where we learn to value the mainstream cultures and mainstream values more than our own Indigenous values, our own Indigenous knowledge. We've lost so much. To just give you an example, recently we work on a story project. So we came to realize that in the project, we asked our students to go back to the villages, university students to go back to the villages and collect stories. And then we realized that a lot of the stories have been lost. And also in other projects as well, when we talk about traditional Indigenous knowledge or Orang Asli knowledge, the young ones, even their parents, cannot actually tell us what it is all about, because it's been lost. So that's one challenge that our students are facing now, and we are quite worried that this would mean that our traditional knowledge, our identity will be, we will lose all that if this continues this way. And the second one is because of the stereotypes, the prejudice, and also, the discrimination, the negative discourse, negative lens that people are using to view us. Then there are conflicts between Orang Asli students and non-Orang Asli students as well in school. So this makes schooling experiences not pleasant to the Orang Asli students. So we've heard a lot of stories about how these conflicts are stopping students from moving forward, making schooling even more challenging, because a lot of Orang Asli students, they have to leave their family at an early age. Some leave the family at the age of 7 to live in school hostels because of the geographical factors. So living away from the families and then moving to mainstream schools where the environment is not very friendly to them, that actually impacts the students in many different ways that we cannot even imagine. Trauma that they carry with them, to their adulthood as well. Yeah.
In your line of work, Dr. Suria, do you see ways in which this can be addressed for the younger generation of Orang Asli children? I feel so sad that so many generations may have had already suffered through this, but is there a way that maybe the system, school administrators, teachers, policymakers can find ways to address what is clearly more than just individual experiences, but rather it's a systemic experience? By this point in time, we realize this is a systemic problem. What would you like to see change to address this issue?
All right, that's an interesting question because it's very much related to our ongoing work at the moment. We are collaborating with Ideas. I think you might be familiar with Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs. So we are working with Ideas at this point in a project to build a sustainable network of stakeholders. What we do is we gather different stakeholders together, and also we try to uplift or foreground voices of the communities and stakeholders on the ground more in this project, so that we can hear what the communities really want. At the same time, help other stakeholders like funders and also social organizations, government organizations to really understand what the community wants for their education. So I think by building this sustainable network where we come together and we check our biases, we be open, right, with open mind, open heart, to actually come together and admit that there are things that we misunderstand. There are things that we need to talk more about, and we need to build trust. So if we can come together and acknowledge that and work together, taking one step at a time, then I think we will be able to see a system that is more inclusive for Orang Asli students here. We've already started.
Wonderful. You've already started. Is that what you're about to say? Yes. Okay, wonderful.
We've already started that.
And what is the vision, Dr. Suria? What is the vision to, at the end of your work and what you hope to see? What is that vision for Orang Asli children? Is it to have an education system that is more tailored to their needs, to their to the culture, to their history? Is it to create a more welcoming and diverse environment? What is the goal for inclusive education for Orang Asli children? What is that vision?
Okay. We from time to time I like to talk to the community members and ask the community members themselves how do they view their futures, because different individuals will have different ways of viewing their futures. So I think globally, for the indigenous communities globally and also in Malaysia, all right, one theme that strikes out the most is that our aspiration, our hope to be able to navigate both worlds, the indigenous worlds and the non-indigenous world, like fairly comfortably, and the ability to actually go to one world and it's just to navigate both worlds without being judged, without being discriminated against. So that is a theme that comes out in our conversations, and this is also true for the global indigenous community as well. So for our inclusive education in Malaysia, like you mentioned just now, Melisa, a tailored a curriculum that is specifically tailored for their needs, for our Orang Asli students' needs, yes, definitely. But I would also like to remind us here, because a lot of conversations that we've had so far, where we talk about a different type of system or curriculum, it's always a watered down version. So we are hoping that we need a culturally responsive curriculum, but at the same time enable our Orang Asli students to actually go out, to actually finish schools and contribute in nation building as well. If it's watered down, our students, our young ones will have problems after school, because then they will not be able to be there with the communities to build our nation as well. Yeah.
So final message for our viewers watching today, International Day of World Indigenous Peoples. What is it that we as individuals, as communities can do to support your work, can do to support inclusive Indigenous education?
All right. I think the very first thing that I would like us to do more is probably to suspend all our judgments and our understandings of the Orang Asli communities before we go. I mean, when we embark on this journey working with the communities, this is also a reminder for myself as well, because I may know myself, I may know the communities that I've been working with, but I do not know everything about the Orang Asli communities, even though I'm part of the community. So we suspend our judgment, we suspend our understandings, and we have to be open enough to actually acknowledge that there are things that we don't know, there are things that we need to learn, and there are things that we need to unlearn. And it's all about building trust among non-Orang Asli communities, Orang Asli communities, and also within Orang Asli communities as well. So yeah, that's the number one message that I would like to highlight here, to get to know each other more.
Dr. Suria, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I really appreciate your time and your insights. That was Dr. Suria Selasih Angit, researcher specializing in Orang Asli education. She herself is from the Temia tribe. And that wraps up this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris, signing off for the evening. Thank you so much for watching, and good night.